So, thanks for coming. And thank you for writing the book, Maria.
Thank you.
After I'd finished reading it, and I was engaged the whole way through for many reasons, I burst into tears. Because it just took me back to that place of frustration and anger and sadness at, it's this crazy situation where we know so much about how to improve health and health care, and there's so many systematic things in the way of delivering just basic services to people. So the first thing I'd like to ask the audience is how many people are working in the healthcare sector? And how many are doctors? And how many have walked away? So we're going to have a lively discussion later. But first of all, Maria, tell us a bit about why you wrote this book.
I left 10 years ago. And when I got to the point where I made the decision to walk away, I did that, and I severed all ties really with that life. But the questions, people would always ask, first of all, why did you leave? And I never really had a clear, succinct response. I knew in my heart, but I didn't really have an answer for them. And after the questions, years of questioning, also questioning myself, and sometimes doubting myself, and carrying around feelings of guilt and shame, I then decided to go for it and really interrogate my decision. So it was really just to try and articulate the real reasons why I left.
It's one of the strengths of the book that you don't come across as a victim. I teach memoir writing, and I always think that stopping to reflect and debrief on your own life throws up some very surprising things. So first of all, it was an incredibly wonderful, brave thing that you decided to use this as a tool to examine what happened there. What happened there? It's a question we all have to ask ourselves at some point about something in our lives. And one of the strengths of the book is that it not only examines her own motivations around this, it's an inner and outer journey, as Mervyn was pointing out. And yet, having done it and having come to a place that felt like a point of resolution for yourself, now the book's out in the world, and I suspect that you are going to be seen both as an absolute hero, like the next Minister of Health, or else people are going to say, they might still be asking you very tough questions around, how could you have done that? I had a friend driving in the car and heard an interview with you and heard this term, the doctor walked away, and she said, no, she can't do it, she can't walk away. So you might still get responses like that.
Yeah, I imagine the responses around, how can you do this? How can you air our dirty laundry and all of that, traitor, whatever? Those responses will come, and that's fine. But the responses that have already come, this book has been in bookshops for about 3 to 4 weeks, and the responses that I get almost on a daily basis is from doctors who say, thank you for writing this book. Thank you for giving a voice to something that many of us have been carrying around for years. And for me to get those kinds of emails is, it's very gratifying. And also quite sad, because the emails are usually not brief. I get a sense that people have been carrying all this stuff around with them for so long. They then read the book and suddenly a valve pops and they write these long emails with details. And it's quite sad. It's quite sad that so many of us have been through such harrowing experiences and carrying around all this guilt.
Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about what is it that doctors are expected to put up with, and why don't they complain about it? Why don't they do something? And this thing of burnout, which sounded like you got to that point of burnout where you couldn't even consider any option in medicine, so you just left it completely.
Yeah. I think we go in with big dreams. We want to change the world, we want to heal, we want to cure disease.
You want to star on ER?
I beg
you want to star on ER?
Maybe. So, expectations are huge. Not only our own expectations, but the expectations of our families, our communities. And then you go in and you study, and I was at UCT, so in terms of the quality of training, world class. And then you're in the field, and you know so much, but in terms of what you can actually do, there's a big mismatch. But at the same time, the level of responsibility that you have as a junior doctor is enormous. So you're sitting there kind of suffering through this and grappling with, did I make the right decision? Should I have sent that patient home? Oh, what if something goes wrong? All of those feelings. And also, there's work to be done, to stop and think and question and reflect. There is no time for that. And I think also, as doctors, we're a certain breed of human being. We tend to be people who've always been high achievers, quite ambitious and focused and driven, and to then stop and say, well, this is tough, I'm struggling, I don't know how to do this, that can very often feel like, am I failing here? And I think probably our biggest fear as doctors, well, certainly my fear, was around failure.
And as you pointed out, you don't want to be, you put it so well, you don't want to be the weak link in an already stretched system. Like you're all just hanging on by your fingernails. If one person slips, then there's a feeling that you're letting your colleagues down.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you talk about how little a doctor can do in the field. I mean, of course, we make enormous interventions, but there's aspects of healthcare that you're up against, and there's nothing you can do. There was a bit that you might be prepared to read around one experience, which illustrates the point.
When the man walked into my consulting room, I instinctively straightened up. He reminded me of someone's uncle. He had that uprightness that marked him as a respected member of the community. I had relatives like him. They were the ones in the family who were called upon to officiate in important gatherings and to represent the family in negotiations and disputes. He looked well with his stocky frame buttoned into a thick trench coat. He took his time settling into the chair next to my desk, and I didn't rush him. "What can I do for you, Tata?" I began when he was seated. "Doctor, I'm not working," he responded. I nodded and waited for him to continue. "My children are hungry, doctor," he said. "I'm sorry to hear that, Tata," I said, but he didn't seem to register it. He pressed on with what he wanted. "I'm asking you for a grant, doctor," he said, and he produced a carefully folded application form from one of his coat pockets. "A disability grant?" I asked, though I knew that's what he meant. I'd had this conversation dozens of times in the months that I'd been at the clinic. In desperation, patients came to ask to be declared disabled so that they could claim a government grant. The application required a doctor's assessment and a declaration that the patient's condition indeed precluded their being able to perform work in the future. The patients who came to me very seldom qualified. "In what way are you disabled, Dada?" He frowned. "I beg your pardon?" I braced myself. I wanted to let him down gently. "The only way I can sign for a grant is if I find that you are disabled. In what way are you disabled?" "But I'm not working, doctor," he said. "I understand that, Tata," I said, though the truth was I didn't understand at all. I had a university education, a well-paid job, and I was unmarried and childless. What on earth did I really understand about his life? I changed tack. I looked through his thin clinic folder. He had no chronic illnesses and had only ever come to the clinic for common minor complaints. "There is nothing here that says that you qualify for a grant, Tata." I could tell he understood what I was saying. His shoulders were starting to sag as resignation crept in. When he spoke again, there was pain in his voice for the first time. The other children tease mine because they don't have the right uniform, he said. I said nothing, concentrating instead on maintaining my resolve. He said it in a barely audible whisper. Please, doctor. I looked down in shame. I'm sorry, Dada, I said finally, not daring to look up at him again in case I cracked. Without saying another word, he stood up and left. I was mortified. I had reduced a respectable family man to begging. I knew that I could have helped, that my signature on that piece of paper would have put food on his family's table. And I also knew that had I done that, I would have committed fraud.
Yeah, we can dish out pills, but people are starving, you know.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So there's this terrible new buzzword, I hear it a lot, called resilience. And you bring it up in your book, whether medical students should be taught more resilience in the field. And I don't know if Steve Reed is here, but I think he's written on the subject. Steve, are you here? Are you? You're expected to speak. This question of how do you help doctors get strong in the field, because there's work that has to be done. There are people dying, there's no one else. And at what point do you say, actually, this is abusive, and we actually need more help, and the people in charge must flipping do something about this. We're not going to soldier on anymore.
But it's also, the responsibility lies with the doctors. I didn't say anything at the time. I soldiered on. I think there is such a culture of coping or appearing to cope that people just don't speak up. There was in the papers last week, the University of Stellenbosch, the medical students there, has started a petition petitioning the Minister of Health for better working conditions and safe working hours for junior doctors. From what I hear, the initial response from the Minister wasn't encouraging, but we need to keep the conversation going, and doctors need to drive that conversation.
You're right, but the trouble is there's no time to protest.
Yeah.
But certainly this is a very important contribution to that discussion.
Absolutely.
So there was another quote that really struck me. A quote an Indian author. It's Arundhati Roy. A former classmate from medical school sent me this quote from The Cost of Living by the Indian author and activist Arundhati Roy. To love, to be loved, to never forget your own insignificance, to never get used to the unspeakable violence and the vulgar disparity of life around you. Above all, to watch, to try and understand, to never look away, and never, never to forget. And the trouble is that in medicine, we're so harried and rushed, and we've got to get through the interrogation so we can get onto the treatment. We can't afford to look. We can't. We become armored against actually really seeing what's in front of you.
Yeah, but in a profession that is essentially about healing, when the healers themselves almost have to close their hearts, how much can they do their work in terms of healing and being there for patients? I've had to, part of the process, personal journey since leaving medicine has been to learn to open my heart again, because on the job I had to put up the walls.
So I asked you over coffee the other day, what would you do about the situation if you were the Minister of Health?
It's a very, very difficult question.
I'm going to give you a big budget.
Okay,
Wow.
well, that's... I think that the challenges... It would be easier if the challenges were purely about health. Because ultimately what we want is healthy citizens. That's the bottom line. So, and health is obviously an important part of that, but it isn't the only element. So, sure, it's important to look at the number of facilities, the quality of facilities, getting enough skilled personnel, all of that, equipment, medication, and. But even if the health minister got all of that right, and working hours and working conditions, all of it right, if people are still living in shacks, no running water, poor sanitation, they don't have jobs, they can't feed their children, all the social ills that we know about, what benefit is there going to be, really? How much can medication do? I think that was one of the biggest frustrations for me, just realizing that this person wouldn't be sitting in my consulting room if they had a job to go to. They're here for something other than what I can provide for them. So, yeah, the health minister's job is huge, and I think it needs to take into account all the other elements that contribute to well-being and health of the citizens.
Right. I've got a notion that I'll throw it open to the floor at this point.
Sure, why not?
Because there might be lots and lots of questions.